As discussed in the previous videos, according to Christology, all of creation exists as a combination of heaven and earth. Heaven and earth are the two realms of reality, the visible and invisible, or seen and unseen, and every element of perception is formed by abstract, intangible meaning incarnating itself in the tangible material world. The remaining videos will discuss the cosmic forces of space and time. In general, time is the force which pulls heaven and earth apart, and the domain of time exists when there is no clear agreement between heaven and earth. On the other hand, space is the force which unifies heaven and earth, and the domain of space is established when there is a proper mediation between heaven and earth. Our modern materialistic lens has mechanically explained the time cycle through the movement of planets caused by scientific laws like gravity, and the passage of time is only the abstract possibility for change. However, in the ancient world, time was viewed cyclically rather than linearly, and was not merely the possibility for change, but the cause of change itself. Like the current of a river, time is the cosmic force which carries reality from one point to another. It continually moves us forward from our relatively stable current position towards an uncertain and unpredictable future, thereby undoing previous agreements between heaven and earth by causing earth, or the material realm, to change. And this exposes us to a constantly novel reality. The change caused by time is not any old change, but rather a cyclical and paradoxical change that turns everything into its opposite and then back again. Time changes life into death, only for death to change back into life. It plunges day into night, only for night to emerge back into day. Summer turns to winter, only for winter to change back into summer. These changes are pointless and cyclical because they change something into its opposite only to change it back into what it originally was. Therefore, this type of change ends where it started, accomplishing nothing. This type of change is called transformation, and it is defined as the change of an identity into its opposite. On the other hand, space is the cosmic force of stability. As opposed to time, space creates stability and certainty by holding opposites apart so that they have distinct identities. Space is the force which unifies heaven and earth. It allows us to have conscious perception because in space, the earth, or material reality around us, is properly conceptualized and mapped onto heavenly principles. Therefore, the type of change facilitated by space is called formation. In this case, a heavenly principle develops into a fuller expression of itself. For example, consider the change that occurs when a seed grows into a boy, and a boy grows into a man. In this case, formation is the change of positive development, and is caused by the proper agreement between heaven and earth. Rather than changing an identity into its opposite, the force of space materializes and expresses an identity by changing it into a fuller version of itself. This formation occurs when more earth is properly integrated into a spiritual identity. Therefore, the dualistic forces of reality, time and space, are in a constant tug of war between formation and transformation. In order to understand the domains of space and time, consider the cognitive model of the universe described in Genesis. The universe contains a centrally ordered place, space, surrounded by a periphery disorder, time. In the domain of space, things make logical and coherent sense. They are properly named, as our ideas about what the world is, our heaven, and what the world actually is, our earth, match. Therefore, reality is intelligible, navigable, and predictable. What we expect to happen does happen, because we have the proper theory about reality. However, this space is only a small part of a much larger reality. After all, what we do not know is always infinitely greater than what we do know. Outside of this space is the domain of time. On the periphery of our consciousness is a disordered, chaotic potentiality. In this domain, things are unnamed and disconnected from heaven. Interacting with this chaos is difficult to do, because there is no direct map or way to navigate it. In the domain of time, things are incoherent, illogical, ironic, and unpredictable. The duality of time and space is universal and self-evident from a spiritual perspective. In our own lives, we have familiar, known territory, which constitutes our comfort zones and is recognized as predictable and stable. Outside of this small artificial territory is a much larger outside world. We recognize it as unknown territory, chaos and strangeness. To interact with it is unpredictable and uncomfortable. To review the definition so far, time and space are the two cosmic forces of reality. Space is the force which unifies heaven and earth. It establishes stability through formational, directional, and linear change by materializing reality into a more complete expression of its own identity. And it represents the known, central territory of human existence. In contrast, time is the force which separates heaven and earth. It establishes chaos through transformational, cyclical, circular change by overturning reality into the opposite expression of its current identity. It represents the unknown, unmapped territory of human existence. To understand the cosmic force of time, we turn to the second line in Genesis, which reads, "The earth was formless and confused. Darkness was on the face of the deep, and the breath of God hovered over the waters." Initially, creation is described as both spaceless and placeless, and there is an impenetrable darkness. Not the materialistic cartoon version of darkness like what happens when you close your eyes, but rather a spiritual darkness, an infinite abyss where nothing in material reality is connected to higher spiritual identity. Everything is in a state of flux or change, and nothing is perceptible or identifiable. There is no central axis of orientation. Therefore, one cannot tell up from down or left from right because there are no reference points. Nothing has any identity, and therefore it is impossible to distinguish between opposites. All of reality is unintelligible, as all of the opposites of reality are in a continuous oscillation and mixture, a pure chaos. There is both an infinite multiplicity of identity and a lack of any clear identity at all. To describe this state, the world is depicted as flooded or filled with water. In Hebrew, gal means wave and galgal means cycle, so the author is describing the primordial and natural state of reality as a pointless and cyclical universe, where everything is changing into its opposite and then changing back again. Therefore, in the Bible, water is the primary symbol of time and change. It is neither invisible light like heaven, nor solid earth. Rather, it is a subtle medium which continuously flows and changes between the two. From a scientific perspective, material reality always tends back towards that chaos, a fundamental law of disorder called entropy. Big bangs cause galaxies to infinitely expand, only for them to collapse back together again into black holes until they re-explode into new universes. However, these changes take both an infinite amount of time to occur, yet no time at all. As demonstrated by the physicists of the late 20th century, time is entirely relative and dependent on a reference point, or axis of interpretation. Without that reference point, time is unintelligible. Recently, developments in quantum mechanics have led to the realization that time and space are both contingent on consciousness, or awareness, ultimately confirming what was written thousands of years earlier in the book of Genesis. For this reason, in human terms, the earth does not have an age, because to speak of an age of the earth in human terms requires a human reference point. And there is no human reference point for this cycle because no humans witnessed it or even can witness it. Although one could theoretically assign an age to the earth, the relativity of time makes this theoretical and arbitrary. After this line, we continue on, reading, "God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. God saw that the light was good. He divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. There was an evening, and there was a morning, one day." In this case, God speaks, and light, the purest form of abstract meaning, enters the cosmos. God sends this meaning into material reality not forcefully, like with the pounding of a hammer, but rather through his breath. As described in previous videos, this light is not a materialistic light, like the light from the sun. Rather, it is symbolic of the uncreated light of God's divine energy. This is the cosmic light of the Logos, the seed of the Holy Spirit. It is the light which informs all of material reality, illuminating our consciousness and giving purpose to the previously formless reality. Without this light, all elements of material reality would remain unintelligible and hopelessly disconnected from heavenly principles. Importantly, this light is not fully connected to the obscurity of material reality, which creates the force of time. In this case, heaven and earth, or light and dark, are joined, then separated. They are set in constant oscillation. During the day, heaven and earth are temporarily unified, only for them to divide again at night, plunging the world into darkness. Therefore, the cycle of agreement and disagreement between heaven and earth is caused by the force of time. It is important to note that God is the singular creator of all things, either directly or indirectly, including both darkness and time. In the second stage of creation, we read that God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters. Let it separate water from water. Let the waters under heaven be gathered to one place, and let the dry land appear. Let the earth grow seeding herb, and a tree bearing fruit of its kind with its seed in it." In the second stage of creation, reality emerges from its primordial chaotic state and is stabilized as opposites are held apart. In this case, the chaos of the waters are pushed to the margins so that a firm, stable place, dry land, can be established between them. Further, Christology holds that reality is tree-centric or dendrocentric. In this case, a tree is the primary symbol of the spatial axis. A tree is formed by the proper union of heaven, seed, and earth, soil. A tree symbolizes the developmental and formative forces of space, because through the proper union of seed and soil, a seed comes into its full identity as a tree. Furthermore, a tree also serves as a reference point, or axis of space. It holds the integrity of space by separating north from south and east from west. As discussed in video 7, in order for all the realms of reality to stabilize, a fractal pattern of consistency must be established through a recursive algorithm. A tree symbolically demonstrates this because each part of the tree is a miniature version of the whole. Small branches are like mini trees, and the fractal pattern of the tree is repeated at every level of the tree. Another important symbol of space is the cosmic mountain. Like the tree, a mountain is a marker of space, serving as a type of axis by which one can gain orientation amidst the chaos of the floodwaters. Moreover, a mountain is a symbol because it appears in the shape of the hierarchy of knowledge. A peak or point of wisdom is at the top, and the mountain widens itself down to the earth. Mountains are also recursive because the pattern of the mountain repeats at every level of the mountain, as depicted by a Sierpinski triangle. Here is a graphic illustrating the commonality of the recursive pattern of the mountain and tree. Moving on, the psalmist describes the cosmic battle of time and space, writing, "Who established the earth on its foundations, that it not be moved forever and ever? You covered it with the deep like a cloak, and the waters stood over the mountains. But they fled at your rebuke, and hastened away from your thunderous voice. Mountains rose, and the valleys sank to the place you established for them. You set a boundary they should not pass, no longer returning to cover the earth." The artificial second stage of creation, the establishment of dry land, is not invincible. The earth can always become flooded, returning to its more primitive state as it is engulfed by the primordial waters of chaos. This is what happened during the flood, when spatial stability was totally lost before being reestablished on Mount Ararat. The boundary of time and space is often set by a river, which is a symbol of time. The current of a river moves from higher ground to lower ground, or from heaven to earth. Rivers ultimately empty into oceans, which are the great abyss of primordial chaos. Moreover, rivers often act as barriers that are difficult to cross, creating a border between nations, where the homeland is on one side and foreign lands are on the other side. In mythology, crossing a river or body of water often means traversing from one land to another. It is a change from an old world to a new world, and can be seen in older mythological stories like Moses crossing the Red Sea, St. Christopher crossing the Jordan, or Jesus walking on water. In more modern mythological stories, the crossing of a body of water is illustrated when Christopher Columbus crosses the Atlantic to found the New World. George Washington crosses the Delaware to establish the beginning of global freedom in that New World, and Lewis and Clark crossed the Mississippi to expand the reach of freedom more broadly. All of these stories are symbolic, where the crossing of a river symbolizes the change of the homeland into something new, the passing of an old world to a new world. To conclude, space is the central place where order and stability are established. It is an artificial state symbolized by dry land, where opposites are held apart. It is also symbolized through recursive structures which provide orientation, like mountains and trees. On the other hand, time is on the periphery or edge. The domain of time is primordial and natural, and is symbolized by floodwaters, the river, or the ocean. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate your attention and hope that you have found the introduction to the archaic cosmic forces of time and space insightful.